Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Benchlink's panel on data management. The focus today is building the right data foundations for your biotechnology startup. Setting the right R&D data strategy can help young companies move faster, ensure that innovation scales with their business. In this session, you'll hear from technology experts on how to use data and data infrastructure to move faster, move more effectively in R&D, and collaborate across teams in order to make better and faster decisions. I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Todd and Aaron and then Karina before jumping into the panel discussion.
Great, thanks. And thank you to Benchling for having me represent here today. So my name is Todd Crossell, and I'm the Global Head of Healthcare and Life Sciences at Snowflake. I am a self-proclaimed data geek, so I enjoy working in data just as much as supporting our healthcare and life sciences customers in that. Been in the space for over 30 years, was a very early adopter of Snowflake as a platform, and have been blessed to spend time with a number of teams all around the world, including my own, to see the power of data inside of healthcare and life sciences. So thanks again for having me. Aaron, I think.
Sure, thanks, Todd. And want to echo my thanks to Benchling for putting together this panel today. Aaron Freeman, my role is Principal Startup Solutions Architect here at AWS, focused on healthcare and life sciences. What that actually means is I am responsible sort of for our worldwide technical strategy and execution and working with healthcare and life sciences startups. My background also is actually on the science side. So I'm a bioinformatics scientist by training, have dabbled in computational chemistry before that. And so, getting data, thinking about it, integrating across data silos has always been something near and dear to me. Karina? Thanks,
Aaron, and thank you, Benchling, for having me. My name is Karina Chmielewski. I'm the Vice President of Platform Operations at Third Rock Ventures. And in my primary role, I help our new portfolio companies develop and implement their IT, informatics, and data management strategy. Since joining Third Rock in 2015, I have been part of launching 15 new portfolio companies, both in Boston and San Francisco. Look forward to the discussion.
Great, and to kick things off, I think we're going to start with a theme around what the data ecosystem should look like around a biotech company. And maybe the most basic place to start is why should biotech companies care about software and IT? They're a science and life sciences company. They're not software engineers or software architects, but Karina, you have this as so important for your portfolio companies that maybe you give them a roadmap to do this. But I'm curious to hear from each of you. Why should life science companies care about their software stack and their data architecture and their IT infrastructure at such an early stage?
That's a great question. Building a strong, scalable technology foundation will really let you innovate faster and more effectively. It will help you create secure collaboration platform with your partners. It will let your R&D teams really focus on science, on things that they should be working on, and innovation and discoveries. And for us at Third Rock, the born in the cloud concept, the approach for launching our new portfolio companies has started probably about 6-7 years ago. That's where it was actually originated. And leveraging these well-defined infrastructure architectures, such as Amazon's Biotech Blueprint, leveraging publicly available data sets, software as a service-based commercial off-the-shelf data management platforms really helps us launch our companies faster and better instead of spending weeks, months, well, no, hopefully not years, building solutions to enable research.
And Aaron, you once spent time in the lab, and now that you're sitting on the tech side, I'm really curious your perspective of why this matters at the earliest stage, and some of the tools that you increasingly see folks needing to use and leverage.
Yeah, and and a lot of my time is more on the dry lab side of things. I've been much more of a consumer than producer, I'd say. But really, I have to echo a lot of what Karina just said. It gets back to ease of use and reducing friction on day one. I kind of approach this as a mindset when I work with startups, and I have the good fortune of doing so day in, day out, of really having the conversation of, do we know this is going to be important? The answer is probably yes. So let's try solving for it earlier. Yes, it may take a little bit more, effort just to do one or two more things up front, but long term, it's absolutely going to be the right investment. And what that looks like in actuality, in the way, for example, that we work with customers is one, and is really, again, getting down to ease of use. So it's developing, pre-competitive tools like the Biotech Blueprint that Karina mentioned to make it easier for customers to, adopt a scalable, flexible platform and get started. But it's also to work with SaaS companies, and I think, like, one of the things I would also just probably say on the outset is look at SaaS, right? Like, if you think about being able to move fast and offload risk, SaaS is a great way to do it. And look, and partners that can provide those capabilities really can help early stage organizations accelerate, right? Yes, you can build and deploy your own ELN, but do you really want to? It's so much easier, and it doesn't necessarily provide any competitive value to your organization. So going with someone who's tried and true and is already thinking about, sort of future proofing makes a ton of sense, similar to data architecture and data patterns. And that's why I'm so excited, right, to be joined by you at Benchling as well as Snowflake, because I think the compelling value that both of you provide is really key to all this, right? You help customers get started faster, make their data usable and discoverable sooner. And that's in turn what drives, value to these organizations long term.
Maybe playing off that point, Todd, like what are the types of things that somebody like Snowflake, can take care of on behalf of a company, and then what does that allow a biotech company to focus on?
Yeah, definitely echo what the others have said. And I think, to me, what it means is if you have a SaaS situation like a Benchling, but then, and we see this all the time, there's a lot of SaaS that's being built on top of Snowflake as a platform, but then the customers using that also want to take some of that data. Because of Snowflake data sharing, they can take some or all of that data that a SaaS platform is working, for them on behalf of, and they can take that. And then the big concept I have in this realm is experimentation at scale. If you go back years and pre-public cloud, is that only the largest, global pharma would spend a year, setting up a platform because they knew that they could afford it and they could wait. Startups can't wait, right? You can't wait that long in order to execute. And so platforms that are delivered as a service like a Snowflake and like a Benchling, you're immediately able to, what I call, experiment at scale. And for me, culturally, that was a big change for my team, going from an on-premise environment to it. It was, can we try this? And the answer is yes, right? It's not you have to wait for IT to deliver something in 6 months. Yes, go try it now. You can absolutely do that.
And Aaron, I'm curious kind of how you might explain to a biotech company about that idea of, scale and what they might need to care about at, day one of their company or year one of their company versus later. Like, how do you think about scalability as it relates to the tools and choices people make in their technology stack?
So I'll go a little bit backwards. So from the tools and technologies, you either have to architect for scale yourself, or you work with a vendor or partner who's done it already. And then it's still your problem. It's something you need to consider. But again, a lot of that risk, a lot of that responsibility is offloading. That's part of what you pay for in working with, great third parties. In terms of telling organizations and startups about how to architect for scale, I think the short answer is, do you know where you're going to be? And I think we all have the ideal state when we're starting companies, and looking at Third Rock, for example, and the great success that Third Rock has had. We want everyone to, be the next big thing, to IPO in a couple of years. But do we know it? Do we know that the first approach is going to be the right one? And I think one of the key things, yes, scale is important, but flexibility, I think, is even more so. And so the ability to, do what Todd said and experiment at scale is critical here. And so, you may be running, different sets of genomics pipelines and optimizing that. And then you may be pulling in additional modalities. And then you want to do machine learning. And so you're thinking about GPUs. And all this stuff is at your fingertips. And this sort of utility model makes a lot of sense because you just pay for what you use. If the experiment isn't, directing you towards where you want your organization to go, you stop. You don't have any legacy infrastructure that you then have to decommission or shift or find out another use for. You just go on to the next thing. And so flexibility and scale go hand in hand. And I think that's something that's incredibly valuable as organizations experiment early on.
Aaron, what you just said really resonates with me. We actually did have an incubating project or a company in San Francisco. And it was, incubating for a number of years. And then all of a sudden we decided, you know what, we're actually going to launch this company here in Boston. And because this company was already, born in the cloud, if you will, we didn't have to move anything to the West Coast. Everything was already in the cloud. It completely, because we made this early cloud decision, we eliminated the early investment in expensive hardware. Everything was built very secure, allowed collaboration and data sharing. And yeah, so where are you going to actually build a company? It's not just about where your data is, but also your location. And having everything in the cloud just allows you that flexibility.
Yeah, if I can add on that, I think two real things, and none of us wants a pandemic, but a pandemic forces pivot, right? And so working with a startup last year, or let's say over 2 years ago, and they were on a certain track in a certain pattern, and then as COVID hit, suddenly now they're a very significant player in the COVID testing space. That was not where they were, right? A year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And so we were, the data they were pulling into Snowflake and the things that they were doing were very, very interesting, very wonderful. But then today, for them to completely pivot and still, say it's a different data source, it's a different set of data, but we're now serving the market in a way around COVID that we never would have imagined, right, 2 years ago. The second one is, and this is more in healthcare, but it's the health systems pivoting to virtual care or hybrid in-person, and virtual care. That was a massive, force that was undeniable. And for our customers to be able to now take in that data and be efficient in the way that they're serving patients, and none of them were planning, right, for that. If you go back to January, February of last year, and now suddenly they were able to pivot with a platform, right, that just says bring more data, bring different types of data, not a problem. So those are a couple examples of being able to pivot whether you wanted to or not, right, whether it was in the plans.
I'm curious, Aaron or Karina, some of the drivers that you've seen. So like Todd has talked about a remote world and people maybe even pivoting their whole business. But what are some of the major drivers you see where now companies from day one are saying, like, I need a cloud server provider, I need cloud compute that maybe were not true 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, that they have to think about on day one now?
Aaron?
Yeah, well, I'd say the first thing is cloud computing didn't really exist in full 20 years ago. I mean, I think AWS rates started in the mid 2000s. And, back then, I think it wasn't well understood, but it was something obviously we invested in. We understood this might be something customers wanted, and it's turned out to be, an incredible success, but also, and the reason it is because it delivers a lot of value to customers. So I think the whole thing, there's obviously been a mindset shift, right? When I talk to customers at the outset, I think it's two things, right? The first is access to data. So building off of Karina's point, right? If you want to centralize all of your data assets and be able to quickly incorporate new ones, the whole data lake architecture or lake house, whatever term of the moment we're in, the fundamental idea is we have data from different sources. We need to organize, normalize, and apply a governance layer on it to make it accessible and accelerate discovery. That, I think, is one thing that we're seeing. The second related to that is how do we get value from that data? And that's where obviously machine learning comes in, and being able to quickly scale out, run analyses, but do so in a cost-effective way is something, again, that's incredibly powerful that we weren't able to do 10, 15, 20 years ago that you can with the cloud. And then the third thing, again, getting back to scale, is being able to scale up really quickly when your business hits an inflection point. So whether you're starting to do target discovery and you want to do, say, high throughput virtual screening, well, you're able to do that in ways that, historically with a capacity constrained on-premises cluster, that now you can scale out to thousands or hundreds of thousands or even 1 million virtual CPUs and quickly interrogate vast computational data sets and much more quickly shorten that feedback cycle and get to sort of that lead identification phase. So there's just a ton of capabilities that the scalability and flexibility of cloud computing as a whole provides. But if I had to pick one thing, it makes it easier to get value from your data, whether it's a representation of a chemical compound all the way through to clinical data and integrating and doing multimodal analysis. Like it all comes back to more quickly deriving value from the different types of data that you provide or collect, I should say.
I mean, I think for me, the mindset, the shift in mindset is we now have unlimited compute, unlimited storage, and to me, it translates to unlimited possibilities in terms of what do we do, how we analyze it. And for startups, one thing to keep in mind is that, if you're really thinking about building your technology organization, you can't do it with one person. No one is an expert in everything, right? So, and it really doesn't make sense. And it's unlikely that your leadership team will approve hiring an army to build your informatics platform in the first 3 to 6 months. So how do you prioritize? And leveraging experts, domain experts, and vendors who actually are also experts in your domain in life sciences and in biotech is very helpful. Just because you find a DevOps company, and they are amazing at AWS, it doesn't mean that they can build a high performance computing pipeline that will be very effective and efficient. And so, in my mind, think about what needs to get done, and don't be afraid to leverage outside experts, consultants, services, and platforms, software as a service platforms that are built by companies and people who are actually experts in their given fields. And that's what you as a new company, what you actually need is someone who actually will have that big vision, big picture, and is able to bring this all together and execute.
And that's a good segue to, from the vendor side, I'm curious, like what sort of support or expertise should early biotech companies expect from companies like Snowflake and AWS, or just from vendors more generally? Is that specific to that domain? Is that something that you specialize in, or how do you kind of partner with biotech companies to provide expertise?
That's a great question. I think there are a number of things that we take into consideration when evaluating vendors. The first one is obviously the quality of their platform, of their offering services. And but in addition, thinking about this, many vendors can create a great demo, right? But what's really important is, take that application for a spin, test drive it for a month, make sure you really understand what type of research and workflows you need to execute using that platform. And then, also think about that vendor from the support perspective. Do they have resources that you would potentially need to implement? What is their roadmap? Think about their, they're also ask about their future plans, and make sure you are aligned. If you work with a small shop that is looking for to sell their platform, is that the right choice for you, for example? So just make sure you understand it's not about just the application and ability for this application to support your research. It's also about the vendor relationship and support.
Yeah, for Snowflake's approach is pretty straightforward in saying that, today, and again, I can't speak for Snowflake in the next 5-10 years, but I can speak today. We do not want to compete with our customers, right? And it's the Benchlings of the world, Cerners, IQVIAs, across all of healthcare and life sciences. We look at our customers as our subject matter experts, and a lot of partnership in understanding what the needs are, so they can then in turn go out and serve that market better than we can. We are a young organization. I don't think anyone would call Snowflake a startup anymore since IPO, but I mean, it's something where we recognize, and I absolutely recognize the expertise that an Aaron has, right? Karina, that you have, right? Ashaka, that you have. And it's something for us is that our focus today is to make sure that for what you all want to do to serve the community that you're serving, that we're providing you with the tool set to do that. Some would say data's data, right? Whether it's financial services to healthcare to energy to whatever, and that is true. And so from a platform perspective, we are a horizontal, right, organization across many, and then across many industries. So we have to kind of walk that line, right? We have to stay relevant to all industries while at the same time having a understanding of the industries enough, and partners that like Benchling that are basically can take what Snowflake is and then make that massively relevant to their community. So.
Yeah, I think it gets back to the phrase, our CEO, Andy Jassy's fond of saying, which is there's no compression algorithm for experience. And you get experience in a couple ways. You get experience from hiring people who have done it before, right? People who have spent time in the lab, who have worked in health systems, who have been startup founders or what have you. And you get it from just working with a ton of customers. And so I think one of the big things when, and I used to run the AWS or the APN competency program for healthcare and life sciences. And one of the things that you look at as part of that is customer references, right? You want to make sure that, your vendors are continuing to deliver value to customers that I'm not going to say are exactly like you, but have similar profiles, and that the problems, it can be exciting and it can absolutely be the right business decision to be the first customer in a domain. But there is a lot of value of working with vendors who have worked with customers before you, who can understand your problems more deeply, right? It's, not about anything beyond the fact of customer empathy, being able to really dive in quickly, understand your workloads, understand what you feel as a customer differentiates you as a business and what you don't want to own. And then hopefully that vendor can take away all of that undifferentiated heavy lifting and allow you to innovate.
I'm curious, maybe for the portfolio company side, what are the types of things you might see portfolio companies are very computationally driven, trusting vendors with, and then what are the types of things that you work with those vendors to create kind of their own differentiated assets, maybe as an example, perhaps?
Well, so the pre-competitive data management infrastructure, for example, the ELNs, the inventory systems, the registration systems. There are so many platforms available out there, and yes, some of them have different bells and whistles, but many of them do the same thing. And sometimes picking one vendor over another, it may be a very hard decision, but at the end of the day, it is, it's an electronic lab notebook, right? So it's something that creates the IP, that creates value in in your organization, in your data, and it's very innovative. Something that maybe you don't want to get out to the world too early. You rather create this, continue building this value internally, and until it's ready for prime time. So for example, with the AWS Biotech Blueprint, this is actually a project that Amazon and Third Rock started 6 years ago, and many of our portfolio companies were building it with Amazon, with AWS for 3 years, and at some point it was officially announced, I think, in 2018. And you just want to make sure that whatever you build in-house, it just generates value. And one thing that you really want to make sure is that you do not reinvent the wheel. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And sometimes at Benjamin we say, like, let us handle the common boring thing that you just have to do, and then you can focus on your science, what's unique about your business. So coming around towards the end here, I'm curious for each of you, what practical advice would you give to the folks in the audience? We have a lot of biotech startup founders or early stage biotech companies. What is the practical advice you would give them today?
I mean, I can start. I think, to me, and having seen this many times, is whatever. Don't get married to what you've created. Don't think that what you're doing is set in stone from a data management perspective. I worked with my team on Snowflake for about 2.5 years before I joined Snowflake, and what I would tell people is the very first project we did on Snowflake, and the way that we built out our data ecosystem, when you fast forward 2.5 years later, it turned over, right? Just the way it looked, the way we governed the data, the way we did all those things. But in the end, that data that we had on day one was still there, but we were accessing it more efficiently. Obviously, there was a whole lot more, but there's so much learning on top of learning on top of learning. And because of that scalability and that flexibility, is that we weren't locked in. You hear about like the horror stories of other data management, data warehouses, and what have you. It's like, okay, we're building this once and it's going to be locked in stone like that forevermore. And that's the biggest advice I can give, is don't get hung up on the way that things were in the past, is recognizing that you can build upon it and it can look completely different in X number of years later, but you've still got that initial value. It's still there. It just may look completely different and massively more mature in the way that you're accessing data. So every time you add incremental more and more data, don't get married to that data model. Don't get married to this or that or the other. Just recognize that at any point you can do an experiment at scale and potentially completely change the way that you govern the data, the way that you organize the data, the data model that you put it in. But within a snap of a fingers and very quickly, you can adapt, right? You can change the whole way that you manage your data. So don't worry. My thing is, like, don't worry about it, right? Like it's okay to be insanely flexible, but get started, right? Get started now, because you'll learn every step along the way.
I think my piece of advice would be, pick the best of breed systems for managing your data, remove the silos, integrate them well, and build a platform that will allow you to aggregate data from your multiple data sources and leverage machine learning and other technologies to build value in what you have. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, and I think, just sort of building off of that, I always come back to, like, the question of, what are those truths that aren't going to change, right? We know data is valuable today. We may not know what value it is, but we know that it is. And so what that leads me to is a couple pieces of advice that, and things that I've worked with customers on, which is embrace flexibility, and sort of this whole idea, don't automate or don't build what you don't fully understand yet. And so what I mean by that is, yes, there will be a time for optimized data models. That time is probably not at the beginning. And so when you do make these decisions, think about future proofing, think about starting general and getting more specific over time. And if you do choose to work with a vendor that can enable that.
You. And just recapping, I think we've gotten a lot of very helpful perspectives from both leading vendors for data management and computation from AWS and Snowflake, as well as both the kind of biotech investment side from Karina on, why is it important for startups from the get-go in life sciences to invest in their data infrastructure? Who are the vendors and how should they select and evaluate who should be used for what? As well as how can they focus on what creates value for them uniquely and what can they rely on vendors to provide for them who have their own internal expertise on compute and on data analysis so that companies can focus on what they are actually uniquely best of breed and good at. So I want to thank all the panelists for their time and their expertise and please reach out to them if you are, a biotech founder, early stage CEO, or company getting off the ground. As we see at Benchling, you need this in kind of this age of biotechnology discovery, and feel free to reach out to us.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, thanks for having us.
Thank you.